All right. So thank you, everyone, for joining today. The presentation will be done by Cassandra. My name is Nancy. I am an intern psychotherapist, also a registered psychotherapist qualifying. So again, feel free to drop any questions in the chat box, and we'll address them at the end of the session or at the end of the seminar. I'll be co-facilitating, so I'll be jumping in sometimes. So I'll go ahead and pass it on to you, Cassandra.
Okay, thank you, Nancy. So yes, as Nancy mentioned, my name is Cassandra. It's nice to be introduced as I'm used to doing the introducing. So yes, I am the founder and CEO of One Piece Therapy, as well as one of the registered psychotherapists at the practice. And as you see here today, we will be talking about self-esteem and really asking ourselves, what about me, right? So paying attention on how we can build our self-esteem. Please, if you are joining live, you don't have to be on video at all, but please do be on mute and participate in the chat. I have a few activities to do. So again, love participation and engagement. Before we tap into the, self-esteem, talking more about it, I do want to bring up the reason I want to talk about it today. As I notice within my clients and my different experiences within the psychotherapy field, a lot of people have self-esteem concerns, right? Regardless of what they're coming into therapy for, whether it be about grief or trauma, anxiety, we are somehow talking about the relationship with their self and therefore their self-esteem. So today's webinar will cover, we'll explore and clarify what self-esteem is, the significance of it. We'll also identify how building our self-esteem can be challenging and the different ways these challenges manifest in our lives. But also we'll be offering different tools on how you can build your self-esteem and overcome these challenges on a daily basis. So the next slide, please, Nancy. Okay, so here's the agenda. So it's a full agenda. Although I put questions at the end to ask, please feel free to ask throughout. If you're watching the recorded version, of course, put in the comment section and we'll respond there. But today we'll be talking about, defining self-esteem, what influences it, the difference between high and low self-esteem, what impacts our self-esteem, then do an activity, and then talking about, why building self-esteem is so challenging, how to build it, another activity, and some tools, including daily affirmations and a mindfulness activity, and again, questions towards the end. The next slide. Okay, so this is for the audience. What is self-esteem? You're also part of the audience today too, Nancy. I'm probably going to be putting you on the spot a little bit.
Sorry, I took a moment to unmute myself there. Yeah, so that's a great question. A lot of the time we think about self-esteem, and it's really much about how we feel about ourselves, right? What we think about ourselves, but also it's how do we talk to ourselves as well? What does that sound like?
Yes, absolutely. It is about how we are perceiving and responding to ourselves, right? So I do say at this point that self-esteem can be defined as many things as it is a subjective experience. Okay. The next slide, please. So, more of a definitive, concrete way of describing self esteem. It's seen as a positive or negative orientation towards oneself. It is about the overall evaluation of one's worth or value. Because, we're talking about, again, this the opinion that you have of yourself, how you feel about your abilities and your limitations, and also your beliefs about your worth and your value. Um, as a psychologist named Morris Rosenberg mentioned, is self-esteem is a favorable or unfavorable attitude towards yourself. Even pausing here, he also invented the Rosenberg self-esteem scale, which is it's a tool, it's an assessment of how to gauge where your self-esteem is at, right? So it's on a Likert scale. The score is ranging from 0 to 30, 0 being low self-esteem, 30 being high self-esteem. And it is said that the average or the normal score is 15 to 25, right? So even that already puts it in a great perspective that normal doesn't have to be 25 to 30, right? It is about the 15 to 25 and feeling comfortable within that space. Um, Also, it being a continuum, which is something I'll get more into after, but actually, yeah, I'm going to get more into it after, but just keeping in mind that the scale and then what is considered normal self-esteem is from 15 to 25. Next slide, please. Okay, so what influences self-esteem? Societal messages. So this is, how other people react to you, your role within society, whether perceived or actual, your status in society, again, whether perceived or actual, and also media messages, right? We all know how crucial various forms of media is to our mental health, and it also is towards our self-esteem, right? Family messages can also influence our self-esteem, and this can be the experiences that we've had within our families, things that we've seen, things that we've heard, and this can also be from childhood up until recently, right? So we are still influenced regardless of the timeline, and just being aware of that aspect of influence as well. Self messages. So this is, your thoughts, your perceptions about yourself and different parts of yourself, right? For example, your age, body, skin tone, different parts of what makes you you and your thoughts and perceptions about it. Um, Also brain chemical messages. So this is more relating to mental health conditions or diagnoses, but also brain injuries. So a bit of science lesson here. When it comes to the deep limbic system, right, which is the control center for our behavior and our emotional responses, when that is working too hard, that tends to be more negatively focused, right? Because that's also part of our amygdala, which is our emotion control center, typically known for controlling fear and aggression. But again, when these are working too hard, it tends to be negatively focused and therefore can lower self-esteem, right? As well as with the basal ganglia system. So the deep limbic system, the basal ganglia, they work, they interact together. Also controlling the motor. When this system is activated, it impacts anxiety, symptoms of anxiety, and our nervous levels. And with this excessive activity with anxiety and nervous levels, it can lead to unfounded feelings of being judged or scrutinized, right? So again, when we are activating heavily activating, excessively activating these parts of ourself, parts of our brain, it therefore can lead to more lower self-esteem as well. Um, with all these messages though, like there's so much different parts of life that we're interacting with on a daily basis. It can be challenging to really know who our authentic self is, right? Which is okay. It's definitely okay to not know today, yesterday. It is, again, truthfully challenging to be influenced by so much and then pinpoint, okay, what makes me me and who am I? So I have some suggestions for questions on gaining a bit of insight for who you are. So one activity that helps figure it out is by discovering and creating a list of what you like versus what you don't like. Right? Um, Another example is to answer questions like, let's say if you won the lottery, what are the first three things you would do? Right? Just thinking about that already, it gives insight to what your priority would be, right? Are you going to buy a car first, right? And what type of car, right? That says a bit of what you like and don't like. Or are you going to buy a house, especially in this market, depending on how much you win, tapping into that market. So that question will help highlight what is the priority for you, right? Another question is if you could get three wishes, what would they be? Right? This gives a bit more insight in terms of what your values are, right? What are you yearning for, which is going more towards the core of who you are and that authentic being that is there. Another question is if you could travel anywhere in the world, where would you go? Right? Each culture, each country has its own culture, right? So the reason for going to a country highlights what we value in our surroundings, right? Where we feel most comfortable. For example, for me, going to Indonesia is on my bucket list because it has a lot of culture with dance and the different sculptures. And I was also told it has a relaxed vibe as well. So that lets me know that's my comfort and these are things that I value as well. Um, Also keeping in mind too that as you are exploring who your authentic self is and acknowledging where these influences can interrupt or disrupt that process, it can make things a bit complex, right? Sometimes people will say, okay, now I'm developing three parts of myself, right? Who I am with myself, who I am with family and friends, and who I am in society, right? And that is completely fair on a behavioral level, but at core, there's still that value there, right? That highlights more of your authentic self as well. Um, Next slide.
Sorry, I just wanted to jump in there, Cassandra. You mentioned, I really like how you tied in self-esteem with the self-awareness factor. The more you become self-aware, the more you become aware of the influences, that society has, family has, self, and even on a chemical level. The more you're aware of all of these things onto yourself, the more you can make more informed decisions and even have those questions that you asked, right? And digging deeper to see what is the core and what is the value. So yeah, I thought that was great.
Yes, thank you. Absolutely. Self-awareness is so crucial to how we navigate our world and develop a filter from these messages and these different influences that are constantly there on a day to day. So thank you for that, Nancy.
No worries.
Okay, so through the highs and lows. So high self-esteem can look like various things, such as a balanced and accurate view and belief of self, feeling more grounded in reality, more resilient. able to form secure and honest relationships, able to weather stress and setbacks. Ultimately, that security that is there within yourself is also present when experiencing high self-esteem, right? Sometimes people think like, boasting or feeling superior may seem like high self-esteem, but most often than not, it can reflect insecurity and low self-esteem, right? Ultimately, high self-esteem is not about showing yourself up, but it is about believing, liking, loving, and respecting yourself, right? Um, Low self-esteem can look like having little value of self, ideas, and opinions. There is this minimizing that can happen, or maybe even dismissing sometimes. There's worry or fear about not being good enough, focuses on the weakness, and various things such as self-doubt and criticizing self, right? So there's more negativity present, which is something we'll talk about how to redirect that in future slides. But also, again, going back to one of the first slides about the scale, the Rosenberg scale. So self-esteem is thought to be on a continuum, right? Sometimes we are going to experience days where we're feeling a bit more lower self-esteem. That doesn't mean we now have low self-esteem. It's just in that moment there is more present low self-esteem. In other moments or environments, we experience more high self-esteem, right? So again, acknowledging being between 15 and 25 according to the scale is okay. And we don't always have to be high either. Yeah, can continue.
Yeah, sorry, I wanted to jump in. I really like the fact that, where you are, you mentioned that where you are in a current position doesn't mean that, this is your overall outlook on everything, right? You can be in a really difficult place, like maybe not doing so well on a test or an exam. And then that can lead to ruminating thoughts and going into, well, I could have done better and things like that. But there could have been some time in that timeline, in your timeline, where you did do well on a test, right? So yes, I liked how you were able to mention that even in the times where you are feeling sense of low self-esteem, it doesn't have to, set the tone for, your overall self-esteem always.
Yes. Thank you, Nancy. Because, yes, now that's going back to the brain chemicals and then activating the limbic system and the basal ganglia, where it would be more negatively focused if we're spiraling within that negativity, right? Um, so why is self-esteem important? For various reasons, it heavily influences people's choices and decisions on a day-to-day, but even life-changing decisions as well. For example, do I feel like I'm good enough to apply for this new position and advance my career or apply to this school? Um, Questioning these major decisions about where you want to go, right? The motivational function, such as if you have the motivation to go to the gym, right? Or even start cooking. That's something I'm working with right now is cooking more frequently. It impacts professional success. Again, the progression of being in a position or changing career paths entirely, academic success, being students especially, we need that to progress further, right? So there tends to be these questions of the self-esteem of, I get one fail, that means I can't do it all, right? That means this is not the program for me, or again, just different questions about that path of academic success because of the self-esteem might be a bit challenged in that moment. It also impacts relationships with others, and overall impacting mental health, right? ultimately, self-esteem does help navigate our world and our spaces, and when it is being challenged, it is challenging to function with that, right? Yeah. Okay, the activities. So my favorite part. Um, so this activity is, we've spoken about what self-esteem is. Oh, I believe someone is unmuted. Um, yes. Um, so we spoke about what self-esteem is, what influences it, and what it can look like. So where I would like to go with this activity is giving 5 minutes to identify what are your three strengths and why you're grateful for them. Um, you don't have to share if you don't want to. Of course, please do share if you are that in the chat box. But again, just identifying three strengths and why you're grateful for them. Those that are watching the recorded version, please also take this time to identify. Um, and you can pause or skip and whatever makes sense. I'm also going to be writing down so I can share a little bit. And those that are coming in possibly wondering why it's quiet. So I just asked everyone to take about 5 minutes to identify what their three strengths are and why you're grateful for them. I just want to check in. How are you doing, Nancy?
I'm just wrapping up here.
Okay. Okay.
I think I pretty much have mine together. How about you?
Okay. Yeah, I have mine. Um, I don't know how everyone else is doing, but feel free to also, um, if not keep it to yourself, you can also write in the chat, and we can see some responses as well. For me, I can share a couple of my responses. So, one of my strengths, I would say, is my intuition. It has definitely helped guide me through challenging times, whether it's a work situation or personal, relational. Um, and it also helps me be in touch with different parts of myself as well. So I can access different information and what I need in a given moment. Um, I would say also my voice is one of my strengths. It helps me get my needs met, so I can speak up for myself. It's also, I've learned recently, or maybe accepted the reality that I'm funny. So I laugh at my own jokes sometimes, yes. But I really learned that people find me funny. So it's like, okay, well, my voice helps contribute to lightness as well. Um, and singing and, just having that relief. Yeah, those are a couple of mine.
Thanks
Would
for
you like to share? Yeah.
Sure. I put down one of my strengths are being perseverant. So I guess that helps me in a sense of, not giving up. Um, and even when things are difficult, it almost helps embrace the difficult times too.
Yeah.
And also, I would say being family oriented.
Mhm.
I feel like that's the root of love for me.
Mhm.
So yeah, I appreciate that. And then another strength would be me being peaceful. Um, I think that allows things around me to be less disturbing, and just kind of being able to maintain my peace within is so important for me. So yeah.
Yeah, those are lovely strengths. Thank you for sharing. Um, I definitely resonate with the family oriented nature, right? I think all of your strengths actually go back to just being grounded to some degree, right? Being headstrong or the love, being peaceful. Yeah, it's so important to be grounded.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. Um, we can go to the next slide.
Sure. I'm just gonna take a look quickly in the chat.
Okay, yes.
Sorry, I wasn't seeing the notification, everyone.
Oh,
Um,
yes.
I'll just quickly state a few people had written, what it is, what self-esteem is, how
Mhm.
we feel about ourselves and the value we place on our worth. And
Yes.
also, self-esteem is a fluid state of mind. Thank you for that.
Yes. Yes, thank you. Yes, we 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 missed these originally, but that's so on point to what self-esteem is, right? The perception of ourself and our worth. And I like that you acknowledge it as fluid
Mhm.
too, right? Just because we're high now, it's okay to be low sometimes or neutral, and just because we're low now, it's okay to also know that we can get higher as well. Thank you.
So I do have a visual on the chat box now, so please feel free to continue to use it during the webinar.
Yes. Okay, so with our listed strengths, right, we can acknowledge hopefully at least one strength we have. Then the question is, why is building self esteem so challenging given that we have strengths? Okay. Um, I'm curious what you think, Nancy.
I think one of the things you mentioned earlier, just the so many influences on our self-esteem, right?
Right.
Maybe if it was just us alone in the world by ourselves, then it would be so
Yeah.
much easier. It's like, I like this, I don't like this, right? Um,
Yeah.
but when we have so many influences, it can be hard to decipher, and kind of shutting the noise out and still being true to yourself.
Mhm. Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah. Again, there are so many influences that absolutely make it challenging, right? And although we say, we do sometimes want to be alone and just, blank out, block out all of these influences, the reality is we're not, right? So it's how do we navigate our world knowing that there are challenges to navigate. You can go to the next slide. Okay. So with that, self-esteem is challenging because our brains have to adapt to repetition, right? Our brains need repetition to adapt in order for something to become more automatic, right? And that's just like with many different things, such as riding a bike, for example, right? The more we do it, regardless of how long it takes us to pick it back up, there is that muscle memory, right? Driving, playing sports, doing a dance routine, right? It does take that repetition. So sometimes when it comes to building self-esteem, the repetitiveness of what it looks like to be more high, right, on the self-esteem scale is lost when it comes to these various influences, right? We might focus on just having low self esteem in certain moments, then that becomes more of what is repeated instead of those moments where it's high, right? So again, it can overshadow that. And because our brain needs repetition and it adapts to repetition, if we're not repeating certain things or we are repeating more negative things, that is what can make it more challenging to build as well. So definitely being mindful of what is being repeated. um, and low self-esteem may feel like you're not able to face challenges or complete obstacles, right? So if we're already feeling low, then that is going to feel even more challenging to try to move towards that continuum of feeling a bit high or neutral within our self-esteem. uh, Definitely it is challenging, right? It's absolutely challenging. Unfortunately, it is not a quick process and it does take time, but it is so important to know that it is possible and it is achievable, right? Again, just that awareness of what is being repeated that makes it more challenging to achieve. The next slide, please.
Sorry, I just wanted to add quickly, I love that you brought up that it's a process, right? It takes time and, the whole repetitive factor, right? I always like to dive into the why factor, right? Why do the thoughts sound like this? Why are you talking to yourself like that? And sometimes it takes healing and acceptance of that why, right? Were you spoken to like that? Where did it come from? Where did you learn to speak to yourself like that? Was there someone else that was in your life that spoke to themselves in that sense, or looked at themselves in that regard, and you've picked up on that without even knowing, and then it becoming that automatic response, and then you come to a point where that self-esteem is low because of those patterns.
Yes. And that's such a great distinction too, Nancy. Again, it is going back to influences of who we are surrounded by. Um, because we can pick up on people's behaviors, right? People's energies, coping, and therefore we can take it on as our own sometimes, and it can be internalized, right? So again, asking yourself these questions that challenge who your authentic self is, so you can build that filter. Like, okay, you're familiar with low self-esteem because of what you were exposed to, but is that truly how you feel about yourself? Right. So that is a great way too, because it's challenging to build if you're in an environment that is not supporting that growth. Right? Or yeah.
Thanks, Cassandra.
Okay, so how do we build self-esteem? Wear clothes that make you feel good, right? Truthfully, sometimes it starts from the outside before we can tap into the inside. So, wearing something that feels nice, can boost it up even if it's for that moment, right? Having a healthy and balanced diet as well. Truthfully, we are what we eat, right? If we're eating, we're healthier, or again balanced diet, then we internally can start to feel good, and that can be shown externally, or even be kept internally, and that's all we need is just that internal goodness, right? um, Changing negative thoughts, right? So this series of questions I like to give clients to ask themselves, asking yourself, is this really true, what I'm thinking, right? Would I, yeah, would you say this to someone else in this situation, right? If it is a negative thought, most likely you won't say that to someone. And then it is about that follow-up question of, then why are you saying it to yourself? Right? Oh, you're not good enough to get that promotion. Well, is that really true? And would you also tell someone that they're not good enough? Then why are you saying it to yourself, right? And what benefit do you get from thinking that as well? Okay, so I don't feel good enough to do this, so I'm not going to try to apply for a new position or switch career path. Um, what benefit are you getting from thinking like that or about that? It is truly about flipping the positive, the negative into the positive, right? So, for example, um, instead of saying I'm not worth anything, or I'm not worth it. It is changing that into I am valuable, I am deserving, right? Of course, just when we're first starting these new messages and these new language, it can be challenging for our minds to accept that to be truth, right? That is completely fair and quite expected to happen. And with that, we'll talk more about certain language to use to help it be more believable, right? But ultimately, with changing negative thoughts, it's flipping the negative into a positive, right? And even challenging the negative in itself. Another point of how to build self-esteem is socialization. So, as Nancy mentioned, although we, sometimes we want to be alone in this world, so we know who we are. The reality is we are social beings that are meant to be attached to other beings, right? So, with that, it's good to be surrounded by people that we can connect with, and people who help us believe in ourselves, right? Um, Even being nice to others or doing nice things for people as well can help build that self-esteem. But again, paying attention to who you are surrounded by, and then really filtering out that process of influence. Individuality. So, although challenging, this part is really highlighting to not listen to others' opinions, and doing something that you enjoy, right? And again, acknowledging that figuring out what you enjoy can be challenging at times. So one question, if you're not sure, is by asking, yourself, just differentiating between what you need and what you want, right? I notice with some clients, when it comes to building their self-esteem, and this that individual sense of what do I enjoy, when we're unfamiliar with enjoyment, it's implying that we're also unfamiliar with being happy, right? So we don't know how to experience these emotions because we've been focusing quite heavily on what our needs are, right? So giving ourselves permission to also explore what we want, right? And becoming familiar with that aspect of happiness and enjoyment that way. Um, ultimately building self-esteem is with self-compassion, right? That is truly a healthy act of building the self-esteem. And another activity. So here, since we've been talking about, why building self-esteem is challenging, how we can build our self-esteem, I do want to encourage us to list 3 challenges that we experience and what we can learn from them. And again, I'll give another 5 minutes if needed. Feel free to write in the chat or keep to yourself. And again, those watching the recorded version, please engage as well. And just to repeat the question, list 3 challenges and what you can learn from them.
All right.
How are you?
I got my
Sorry?
challenges.
You got yours? Okay. Are you okay with sharing?
Sure. I can share. So some of the challenges I would say is accepting that some things are out of our control.
Mhm.
Um, and that leads me to focus on the things that I can control.
Right.
And and I think that that is pretty much in line with building self-esteem, right? And just kind of having that self-awareness and focusing on what you can control. And then also not to I guess with the perseverance, this goes hand in hand, and not to overdo or not to overwork.
Mhm.
So that is a challenge for me, and that kind of lets me lean into self-care and lets me lean into self-compassion as well. And then the last would be finding balance, which is a little bit like the other one, but I think balance is more incorporates other things aside from just myself. So it helps me remember everything that means a lot to me, and also to give what it deserves. So just as I want to give to myself, there are other aspects in my life that are also deserving.
Yes, absolutely. And as a whole, just giving space to
Mhm.
these different parts of you, right? And the reasons your challenges appear. Um, because even talking about self-doubt,
Mhm.
right? And how focusing on something that you can't control
Mhm.
more so enables the self-doubt and enables the lower self-esteem instead of, okay, redirecting what can you control in that situation, and that
Mhm.
increasing the self-esteem, like, okay, I can do this, and building on that.
Exactly.
Yeah, nice. So for me, one of my challenges is patience. And it's not that it's not there. Definitely I have patience, but what I do acknowledge in different contexts that it appears it's either in that moment, it's letting me know that I have boundaries, and that my patience is up because something is being crossed there. Um, or because I value organization. When my patience is a bit more irritable, then I don't feel organized and I can feel disoriented sometimes. And just generally too, like feeling and being a go-getter, right? When my patience is challenged, it's like, okay, I have things, I have things that I want to do. Um, and knowing that that's where it's coming from helps, right? Um, Another challenge of mine is being confrontational. Um, it's not in the way of like, oh, you don't like my shirt, Nancy. Like, what are you trying to say? But more so about the relational aspect, the nonverbals. There's something feeling uncomfortable within me, and that helps me know that because I value transparency and communication and understanding, I seek that, right? Which can be in a confrontational way sometimes. And it also helps me in my sessions too, right? It helps me really be able to provide clients with more insight by challenging them in certain ways as well. And I do notice that sometimes another challenge of mine is being unforgiving when it comes to more personal um, conflicts of mine, and different contexts of where forgiveness might be needed. And again, I noticed this to be something about my boundaries as well. And knowing that if I feel like, okay, I can't forgive this, then my boundaries is really being challenged, and even my worth as well. Um, yeah. Okay, so daily affirmations. So this is going back to using what language you're using when talking to yourself, right? So, for example, I gave the example of saying, instead of "I am not worth it," right? It's the progressive language of you're in that activation, you're in that phase of doing. Um, I'm on my way, right? I'm on my way to feeling like I'm worth it, right? Or I'm exploring what it means to feel like I'm worth it, or know like I'm worth it. So it's giving yourself space and acknowledging that you are in the process of developing, instead of full stop, I am worth it, right? Um, even disclaimer language too, such as, even though this has not taken hold as yet, um, I do know that I am worth it, right? Or this can be at the beginning or end of the sentences. I am worth it, even though this has not taken hold as yet. Another example is, even though this feels silly right now, I am worth it, right? So again, using this disclaimer language so that our brain can adapt to it a bit more, and it can be more receptive to repeating these statements. Um, what I also want to highlight too, in terms of even saying at the last point, is, even though this is silly right now, it's so crucial to use simplified language, sorry, instead of, saying pathetic or stupid, saying silly or fully bought in, right? Using that more gentle, compassionate language as well. Um, there are also various different apps that help with daily affirmations. I know a couple of them are daily affirmations. One is actually called that. There's one called I Am, and there's another one called 365 Gratitude. I can also put this in the description for those watching the recorded version, but there's so many different daily affirmations app. And again, our brain needing that repetition, it is also important to develop that language. Um, and next slide. Okay, so that is the end of the presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. And thank you for watching as well.
Yes, thank you for participation and the comments. Much appreciated. And if you would like to have access to the video, you should be able to access it through the website, and also it will be posted on our YouTube. So that's where it can be accessible. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And are there any questions before we close out?
If there's no questions, I do know there are some typical questions that are asked. I don't mind going through as well. And again, as I'm speaking, feel free to ask any questions that come up. So one question that is typically asked is, how can I surround myself with people who are encouraging? And what I say here is, as challenging as the relationship with social media can be, as Nancy highlighted too, there's also elements where we can control what we are focusing on, right? So following certain people on social media that are a bit more inspiring or motivational, bring out that aspect of you that you want to develop. Developing new friendships as well, and even attending different events or things of your interests and meeting people of similar interest, right? For example, if this was in person, going to a webinar about building your self-esteem, building a friendship and helping each other build self-esteem is also very beautiful as well. And even listening to different types of music, having that that enjoyment and that that inspiration as well. Another question that gets asked too is, how do I begin to feel good about myself? And that's a big question. And with big questions, we start small, right? So a quick tool I like to suggest is just checking in with yourself throughout the day, and writing 1 to 3 things that you did today that went well, right? Even, for example, watching or attending this webinar, right? One thing that went well. Writing 1 to 3 things that you feel grateful for, right? So ultimately, just focusing on the positives um, helps us begin to think, see, and believe more positively, right? And again, of course, therapy is also available. We do have a team where we are accepting new clients as well, and we'll be happy to continue this conversation and help you with building self-esteem. Yeah.
Great tips. Thank you, Cassandra. That's a comment.
Yes, you're very welcome. Thank you for attending today. Again, thank you everyone for attending today. The take home message is building self esteem is challenging, but it's definitely possible.
Thank you again, everyone, for joining.
Take care.
Bye.